This will be the Photoshop part of this tutorial. First of all, I wanted to make the tag have a little bit more black on it because I couldn't really get that in the render personally. So I just went ahead and I painted some dark spots, reduced the opacity, and put a tilt shift blur on it with 10 pixels. I just made sure the tilt shift is in the correct position. All right, so next I used a color balance adjustment layer, and I clipped that to the layer below by pressing Alt or Option and in between the layers. And then for the color balance, I just added these values to give it a little bit of a more red color. All right, so for the next part, I'm just kind of going back and trying to see if there's anything that's distracting in the image. And for these layers, I use the new remove tool, and it's a really strong tool in Photoshop. And I just continue to kind of take away the things that are distracting to me. And I continue to use a soft brush to paint over it a little bit darker on the bottom to make it a bit more realistic. All right, so for this, I just wanted to kind of make the blade not so straight. It's very subtle, but I did want to put that there. And I just put a Gaussian blur on it to match the depth of field. So here, this is just looking a little bit too strange to me. So what I did was I used the healing brush tool, and I made sure that was in replace. And I just selected this area and continued to build on to this rock right here to make it look a little bit better. And here I just painted some darkness over here. This is where I start to build the smoke. So I just use this brush pack, and you can get this online for free. But I just went down here and got a smoke brush, and I just painted with white kind of where I wanted. So here's full opacity, and then I just reduced that to 20%. And also I added another one. So like I wanted to make it look a bit extra. It's 120% with both of these instead of just 100%. I also added a blur gallery on that for the tilt shift to make it as realistic as I possibly can. Okay, this is just more smoke in the background, and I continued to build the smoke layers and made sure to add a Gaussian blur on all of them just to make sure that the depth of field is most accurate. It's very important. If you have something that has depth of field and you have something else that is sharp, it's automatically not going to look realistic at all. So you have to be very careful with the depth of field. All right, so here I just went into the reds and reduced right there, and then reduced there, and I clipped it to all the smoke here, so it's a bit more like cyan colored. It matches the scene better that way. It's kind of like a color grade. All right, so I compiled everything by pressing Control, Command, Alt, or Option plus Shift plus E to compile everything into a new layer. I right-click, Convert to Smart Object, and I added a Camera Raw filter, and I'll let you guys just look at the values. This is how I color grade in Camera Raw. I just I put this into a blue color and reduced the blending here, and then I increased some oranges in the highlights. These two are just soft light layers with the reduced opacity to give it more contrast and a little bit of a color grade at the same time. And I wanted the focal point of the image to pop out, so I use a curves adjustment layer, reduce that, and just masked out right here. So everything else is darker except for this part. And then I did the opposite with a little bit of color in the reds and the yellows. So opposite of blue is yellow. And that gave it a really good orange glow to the image. And I just masked it right where I wanted it. So this little part right here is just too saturated for my taste. So I reduced the saturation in the reds, and I just masked out only that part. So with these, I'm just looking for things that are distracting me. There's some dark lines that I felt like it was really distracting, so I got rid of that using the remove tool. And for this one, this was a bit too distracting to me, so I used a multiply layer, and I selected the color. I selected this color, and I just painted over top that and put that into multiply blending mode. I just continue to get rid of things that are distracting in the image. Use a brightness and contrast adjustment layer, and I masked out the areas that I didn't want that to affect. So I just reduced the contrast in the background. So for this layer, I just reduced the opacity and painted the sky color on some of the kunai to make it more consistent with everything. All right, so for these layers here, it's just a screen blending mode with a reduced opacity. And I gave the bright parts a little bit of a bloom effect, which is one of my favorite things to do. So for this curved layer, it's just making it a bit more contrasty. I press Controller Command Alt Option plus Shift plus E to compile everything. Right click, convert to Smart Object. And then I used a unsharp mask on that with these values. So I did the same thing, Controller Command Alt or Option plus Shift plus E to compile to a new layer. Double click that. I uncheck these two, so it's only red. So now you have a layer with only the reds in it. And I just pressed V and moved that over into place. And then the same thing on the next one, except this one's just blue. And on this one, I go the other direction. So for this image, I'll have this image in the description for you guys. It's this, and I put that into screen blending mode. And I masked out what I didn't want in the image. And I scaled it into place to make it look better. I convert to Smart Object, and then Filter, Blur Gallery, Path Blur. And then I just took this and I did this with it. And now it's going downward and then outward. So it's a bit more realistic than just a motion blur. All right, so there were some yellows here that I didn't like. So I went in here. Okay, so I picked like a yellow, like a lot of the yellow and the greens. And I just reduced the saturation and I masked it just right there. So here it's just a multiply blending layer. And I just selected a color and painted just on the bottom right here because I really wanted people to be drawn to the center and not the corners. Okay, so the last thing that I like to do after the sharpen and everything, I like to add noise. So I Alt Option and click New Layer, go to Soft Light, fill with 50% gray, press OK, right click, convert to Smart Object, filter, noise, add noise. And I did this for the final noise layer.